Good evening, everybody. Sorry we're a few minutes late starting. We started chatting about tree sparrows. I can't imagine why, can you? Right, welcome everybody to this evening's talk. As usual, anybody on Zoom, if you get any problems, please do type any problems into the chat, and Elaine, who's hosting tonight, will try and help. And we've had a number of problems over the last few years with sound on Zoom, as well as sound in the room. And we're trying out tonight a new little gadget, which is gobsmackingly small to me, but that's a little mic. So those of you who are on Zoom, please let us know, good, bad, or indifferent. I'm still in the period where I could send it back if it's not working well. But it looks promising. I managed to get almost down to the stairs, and they can still hear me on Zoom. So we'll try that tonight. I'd like to welcome one new member that we've had since the last meeting, which is Mark Collins. Is he here tonight? Well, I'll still welcome him anyway, and hope he has a long and happy association with the club. And I gather there's quite a lot of visitors from the university tonight, so welcome, and you're very welcome to join us to all our meetings. We try and be as welcoming as possible to all people. Right, as usual, I'm just going to go over a few future events for ourselves and the other local organisations, local groups. Firstly, and very importantly, our next meeting in 2 weeks' time is the photographic competition. So if you haven't already got your photos in, you've got until Friday midnight. Maximum of 3 a person, and 3 categories: portrait, flight and action, and birds in Berkshire. Please send them to Jane. I believe we'll be here later. And members only for entering, but anybody is very welcome to come along or to watch online. So that's on the 5th of March. Our next outdoor meeting is on the 3rd of March, a couple of days early on the Monday, where Bob is leading a joint walk with NDOC to Pennington. And a quick reminder, those of you looking at the introductory slides, we've got 2 extra trips which we've added into the calendar for the rest of the season. The first is on Wednesday, the 21st of May, when Liz Carr is organising a trip to Wild Oakingham. And then on the 12th of July, Saturday the 12th of July, we're organising a trip to Bird Fair, both of which you need to book for. So get in quick. There are, I don't know about the Wild Oakingham, but I know some places on the Bird Fair, but the sooner the better. Right, the RSPB Reading's next indoor meeting is on Tuesday, the 11th of March, inspired by Birds Part 2. I know no more about it than that. Obviously, Part 1 has been on by Peter Holden. Their next outdoor trip is on Sunday, the 16th of March, when they're going to Fleet Pond. By the way, any meetings that I'm mentioning for other organisations, I've got more info with me. If you want to find out more, come and see me at the break. Wokingham and Bracknell, I can't say it. RSPB, Wokingham and Bracknell group. Their next indoor meeting is Thursday, the 13th of March, and that's around the world around the UK in 200 birds by Nick Martin. And their next outdoor trip is on Wednesday, the 26th of February, when they're going to Hook and Warsash for a day trip. And NDOC, their next indoor meeting is on Thursday, also on Thursday, the 13th of March. Unusually for them, this is only on Zoom, and it's Birds of Argentina with James Lauren. And their next 2 outdoor meetings are both next weekend. On Saturday the 22nd, they're doing a survey at Buckleby Common, and on Sunday the 23rd, they'll be doing a walk at Greenham Common. A good weekend for commons. And unusually, we have a London-based talk to mention. The Royal Asiatic Society has contacted us to ask us to publicise their talk on Thursday the 27th of February, which is Gleaming Breasted Residents of Streams That Don't Freeze in Winter, The Dippers of the Mongolian Altai Mountains, by Andrew Laurie. It's in London, however, it is also online, and I welcome anybody who wants to find out more about dippers in Mongolia. Never say we confine ourselves just to Berkshire. All right. Okay, that's all the meetings. What about recent sightings? What have people been seeing in the last couple of weeks? What's about? Good. A Dartford warbler at Fobney seen today. Excellent. Four. We've got a chorus of hawfinches at Basildon. Excellent. Bob, you put your hand up as well. Oh, very nice. Marsh Harrier at Moor Green Lakes yesterday. And the same one? Anyways, for those of you on Zoom, there's a small debate going on about it, whether it was the same bird, but it was at, sorry, I can't remember what you said now. Fobney Meadow, Marsh Harrier a couple of hours earlier before the Moor Green Lakes. All right, so there's quite a lot about, I notice oyster catchers are coming back in. Nice to see. I haven't yet made it back to Twyford, so I'm getting a bit worried about that. That's one of the lakes I do the webs on. Speaking of which, we had 4 goldeneye on the webs this morning. It was quite nice at Wisley Mill. Any other recent sightings? Anybody on Zoom with anything to report? No. Silence. Anybody else? Anything? Right. Well, without more ado then, let's get on to the main part of the evening. Before I introduce Matt properly, I'm just going to do the usual and set his slides up so that I can we can get going as soon as possible. That look okay on Zoom, Elaine? Good. Right. So let me introduce Matt to you, a licensed bird ringer who is passionate about conserving farmland birds in Wiltshire. I asked him before we started for a bit more info about him. Past chair of the Wiltshire Ornithological Society, ringing around the world, birding since the early 90s. Reasonable summary? Yeah, good. Thank you. Right, he set up the tree sparrow recovery project for Wiltshire in 1999, and it has grown now to, it says, over 1,100 nest boxes and 12 major feeding stations. But I'm not going to talk any more about that because he's going to tell you all about it. The only thing I would say is I wish we got some tree sparrows in Berkshire. I looked today at when we last saw them, and it was their last confirmed breeding was 96. And they were seen in winters till 2012, and since then it's been just a few odd occasions. So you can sit there and be jealous all evening, I think. You're welcome. Right, I'm going to just pass my microphone over to him, and I'll let him get on with this. I didn't think we were going to need somewhere to put it.
Okay.
I think so. If it's not, then someone on Zoom, I hope to tell us.
I don't often get accused of being quiet.
Right, take it over.
Okay. See where we are. Okay, yep, good evening, everyone. So I am known by several people as Matt the Tree Sparrow, Matt the Sparrow, whatever you will. I was a twitcher in the olden days, long ago. And then I thought, well, what I'll do, I'll turn into a conservationist and a bird ringer so that I can stay in and be home more. And I dismally failed at that. So firstly, need to just sort of set what we're looking for in terms of tree sparrow versus house sparrow, because every time I post on social media, people will be telling me that they've got tree sparrows in their gardens and things like this. And these people are in the centre of Swindon, the centre of London. And then they have lots of big exchanges trying to convince them that what they have not seen is a tree sparrow, they've seen a house sparrow. So house sparrow left, obviously, tree sparrow on the right. The first thing you notice really is actually the size difference. Tree sparrows, the tree sparrow in Britain is about 10% smaller than a house sparrow in the UK. So house sparrows will dominate over tree sparrows. So the last thing I want to see in a tree sparrow colony is a house sparrow. And then people always think that then a female, or this is a juvenile, but look so similar, house sparrow is different from a male house sparrow and all this sort of stuff. So when I have this debate, people will say, well, what does this tree sparrow look like? Is it the one that's this or like this? There's two different ones. And no, obviously, female or juvenile house sparrow, very different. So a photograph like this is what I don't want to see. And it's also quite unusual to get so. So it's a fairly old picture, a little bit grainy, but I just took it quickly just to kind of get this comparison. But let's focus on what is clearly the best bird in the world. So tree sparrows have had an absolutely outrageous decline in the UK since the 1960s. All sorts of thoughts as to why. Loss of the elm tree is huge because they used to nest in elm trees. Elm trees had masses of insects in them. Elm trees, by their sheer presence of size, would stop the farmers flailing the hedgerows. All of these sorts of reasons were why I think that the elm was very important. But obviously, pesticides throughout the 60s and 70s and 80s, herbicides as well, all of these practices. But actually, one of the things that people are overlooking a large amount is the amount of available seed in the countryside. And I'll come to that and I'll touch on that throughout the talk. But nonetheless, this decline is absolutely frightening. And in one way, it's amazing that tree sparrows have persisted at all. But so when I started bird watching in Wiltshire, we had two places to go and see tree sparrows. And we used to go to these two places. One was a house and one was one particular farm. And you'd see 2 to 4 at one place. You might then see 20 at the other. We then found out there's a third site. They've always been at this third site. And there were about 10 or 20. So that was kind of what I knew in about 96, 97, things like that. So I worked for Thames Water. I was doing some conservation work on our sewage works in Swindon as a hobby from my workplace. And the Bird Society in Wiltshire, the Wiltshire Ornithological Society, noticed me doing conservation work and asked me to be the conservation officer. So I joined as conservation officer, and I kind of thought, well, I don't want to do it and just be there in name, so I need to do something. So I thought, well, let's just work on tree sparrow because we only had 2 sites. So I thought this would be easy. I would just have 20, 30 boxes up, a couple of feeders, and we'll just do it. These couple of sites, try and save them on there. And again, I failed dismally in that because I just cannot stop myself to do more. So in the 90s in Wiltshire, we did Big Bird Atlas to see where all the birds were in Wiltshire. This went towards the Birds of Wiltshire, which is a brilliant book, all the birds ever in Wiltshire. And this was the distribution of tree sparrows in Wiltshire about sort of about 20 years ago. But in fact, the population all down the bottom, all down in this area, is virtually non-existent now. There might just be about 10, 15 pairs left. The population up here was fantastic, right by the Thames. That has all completely gone. And I was working in that area. But this is the area that I study and that I work in, and this is where they've managed to persist. But even... It's on here, but...
Oh, yeah, no, you need to...
So, have I got to do 2 things at once? Because if I've got to do 2 things at once, then we're beyond my ability.
I understand it's not... There you go. I'll leave it to you to take out with you.
Okay. Yeah, so this area, there's only about 1 population left, one or 2 dots left. This is the area that I'm working in now, and this population up here has completely gone. So we were working in that area. So Wiltshire is dominated by this fantastic chalk downland, arable chalk. And in most of the area, the way the farms were split up was that every farm had a piece of different landscape. So you'd have a bit at the bottom, which was where the arable was. You'd have up the side of the slope, which is where you'd have a bit of grazing. And then on top of the hill, there'd be some more arable. So they were all mixed farms traditionally, which is obviously perfect for farming and birds. And all the work that I'm doing all the time is very important that I realise that this is a working environment and that I'm a privileged guest in this farmed environment. But also then when people are having a go at farmers, talking about how terrible they are for the environment, yes, some are, but also a lot are absolutely fantastic, which you'll see in this talk. So we have lots and lots of corn buntings in Wiltshire, huge flocks. At the moment, there's one of my sites that's got a flock of 400 corn buntings. But we've got so many thousands of corn buntings that I can't even count them. The biggest flock I've seen in the last 5 years was 700. So many flocks over 200. So this tells you you've got prime habitat. And so to see flocks of corn buntings bashing around through farmland like this, for me, is just, it's daily. We also have huge flocks of yellowhammers. So when people tell me about big flocks of yellowhammers, and I say, how many are you talking about? They go, oh, I saw 20. Well, for me, big starts at around about 100. And the biggest flock of yellowhammers I've ever seen was 1,500, and that was only 10 years ago. So it's regular to see several hundred in the morning on some of these sites. And in the summer, we have a summer visitor nesting in the crops. We have yellow wagtails and several hundred pairs nesting in our crops. So the point I'm making across to you is that this is really, really good farmed habitat. What's out there, insects and grass edges and all of these things, is absolutely prime. So it's no wonder that tree sparrows persisted in this area. So I was starting off with a very good starting point. But what I did is I read through all of the tree sparrow accounts in the annual Wiltshire bird reports. So I started off, how would I do it? And so I just looked at where all the bigger flocks of corn buntings were, yellowhammers and tree sparrows. And tree sparrows were always local. So our records go back to 1974. And then in the Wiltshire, Birds of Wiltshire, it goes right back to any records that were ever encountered. But the records from 100 years ago are fairly useless because they'll talk about a wryneck being seen, or they shot a golden oriole. But they'll say sparrows are doing well. Well, what is that? Is that 50? Is it 100? We have no idea. So there's no historical records of how many tree sparrows there were. We really, really don't know. So all I can do is go back to 1974, look at these records. And again, they were very, very patchy, certain farms, and most of them by public footpaths. So I think the knowledge of them was extremely poor, but they were always scarce and always local. So this is one of the best areas for tree sparrows in Wiltshire. And you could walk in every bit of public area on that view and not see a tree sparrow. And for most of the last 20 years, there's been 200 tree sparrows there. You can walk right past them and you would not know they're there. Now I'm just trying to find the pointer. So we're on the public access here. We can walk all down this track, all the way up, right round, everywhere. But actually, they're all there. All of them. And sometimes they go up to a maize silage clamp here and come back. So when I started, there were people giving records of 2 tree sparrows, 4 tree sparrows. And there were a few more than that, but not very, very many at all. But the flock here has peaked in over 200 in recent years. It's had a decline recently, but there's still about 60 there. And in fact, the decline is largely due to the maize silage clamp going, but also they turn this field to a herbal ley. And a herbal ley, once it's continually harvested, is absolutely useless. All this green farming might sound brilliant, but no one's looked at the impact upon farmland birds. And the tree sparrows right by there have suffered as a result. So this is a very, very old slide taken from that site, from the maize silage clamp. When I very first looked into tree sparrows and I asked the RSPB, and I asked people for advice, they all told me that maize silage is useless for birds. Maize is terrible. Well, we know maize in the ground is terrible. It destroys the soil, breaks the soil up. When you chop it up and you anaerobically digest it, all the sugars and starches all become very useful for birds. Starlings love it, corn buntings love it, and tree sparrows do. And I remember talking to the RSPB in the early days, and they were saying that maize silage has got no benefit at all to tree sparrows. And I showed them this picture. It's pretty conclusive that these things are just feeding on it, to the point where that farm that got rid of its maize silage, based upon my request last year, they've actually grown a crop of maize this year and silaged it in a small field just to feed the tree sparrows in the winter, because they're so desperate to keep their tree sparrows. So firstly, when you're looking at any bird, how can you save it? You got to look at where they're nesting, what they're feeding on, and how safe are they. That's the sorts of things. So tree sparrow nests, I was going to ask who's seen a tree sparrow nest, but unfortunately in Berkshire you haven't had them for quite some time. But if I ask people in Wiltshire, no one's seen a tree sparrow nest. So they're kind of related to weavers, so they make these very intricate nests. It's very hard to find a natural nest such as this in a hedgerow. This is in a beech hedge in someone's garden, and they make this really rough structure, almost like an above ground water vole nest, and then they line it inside, and then they sort of create their little hole. So this is the hole inside, but you very rarely find them. But this is a much more common nest site for tree sparrow, obviously. So you look at this and think, well, where is the tree sparrow nest going to be? There, inside the dashboard of a derelict tractor. I found them in old redundant fuel pipes. Anything where they can squeeze their nest in really small and have a very tight entrance, they will use that. So it doesn't matter. I've got all sorts of photographs of silly nest holes of tree sparrows, but I think that one in the old tractor is a good one. We have discussed about, do we kind of get teapots and silly things and put them out and see what the most novel one you'd be? But actually, it's conservation, so I should stop messing about. So back in 1999, I just stopped my twitching days, thought I was going to stay local, going to concentrate on a bit of conservation, and so I turned around and made some fairly cheap wooden nest boxes, standard BTO design, no problem at all. And I just read up in the BTO nest box guide, and it said 28mm or 30mm hole. That's all it said, not much advice more. I painted them green or brown just so they blend in, and I was away with no knowledge whatsoever. I had no idea what I was doing. And in the first year that I put up about 50 boxes, and I thought that was going to be the end of my project, we had the first boxes used. And I've done quite a few things in the birding world, and I still think for me, probably the greatest single pleasure was the first time we had tree sparrows nesting in a nest box. That was absolutely brilliant. And one of my landowners, she told me about this. She's a lovely lady, quite eccentric, and she said about they make a smiley face because they're happy to use the box. So when they perch up on the hole, they put their feet up. They've got muddy legs, so they make two lines there, and then the tail fans out as they go into the hole, and they make a smile. So you know if a box is in use because you're going to get the smile there. But the hole size is critical, 28 or 30mm. Any bird in the world, doesn't matter what it is going to want to squeeze into the smallest hole it can, so that nothing bigger than it can squeeze in and dominate it, beat it up. And that is critical with tree sparrows. They will go in 32mm holes, but you risk house sparrows going in and doing naughty things with tree sparrows. So these are a nest box that I don't like. This is the Schwegler ones, and I contacted Schwegler and said, could you please make them not 32mm? Could you make them 28 or 30? And they said, we sell so many, we don't need to. And so I used them for a bit, but I don't use them at all now. And this is the reason. So a rubbish picture, but there's a female tree sparrow looking in, she's in the hole, just about see her in the hole there. If I can do this. She is just about, you can see her head there and her bill's there. And she was chipping inside the nest box. And the male house sparrow was on top of the nest box. And he made so many efforts to get into the nest box. He was hanging upside down. He was trying to squeeze in. Being 28mm, he couldn't get in. And she was cowering inside there. and she had eggs as well. And I sat and watched this, took a couple of very bad pictures just for the record. And then I heard this chipping just away, about 10 meters away. And it was the male tree sparrow was calling her out. And she didn't dare. She didn't dare because of the house sparrow that would have wanted to have done something naughty with her. And then if they do, that's no good because they're producing young that aren't viable and they're hybrids. So they're of no use whatsoever. So from a conservation perspective, really, really important to use the correct size hole for tree sparrows. This is one of my very first feeding stations that I started with. So I worked with the RSPB in the first instance because I had zero knowledge about farming and birds at that stage. So I looked up, found these best 5 or 6, 7 sites where there were corn buntings, yellowhammers, and also 3 sites that had some tree sparrows. And we think that we started with probably in North Wiltshire, there were probably about 30 pairs. We'll never really know, but we think that's what we roughly started with. This site did not have tree sparrows. So we hung a feeder up here. That feeder is around about 60 centimeters long, takes around about just under a kilo of food. We put a table there and we just fed a bit of grain under the hedge because there was a flock of 300 corn buntings as well. So we fed there. We fed there for about 3 years. We had a volunteer doing it. No tree sparrows, no tree sparrows. And then on Boxing Day, the chap went there and 9 tree sparrows turned up. And he said that was the best Christmas present he had had. But then it went down to 8 immediately as a sparrowhawk ate one of them. So he was a bit gutted, but actually they nested, and they nested there for quite a few years. And in fact, only the last about 8 years they've not been there. But that's because house sparrows ousted them. And so it was someone in an act of kindness, they moved into a house very nearby. They ran some feeders around the house, and house sparrows managed to move in. And tree sparrows are like the edge bird. They need to be a bit away from them. So we've stopped the feeding. We think the house sparrows have gone. I'm in touch with the gamekeeper, and now we're going to start feeding again to see if the house sparrows have cleared off and that we can get tree sparrows back again, because this site is very, very attractive. But the key point of this slide is this is the scale that I started out on, was just moving these small feeders. And then I put a few nest boxes up. This was fairly small scale, really. Go around with a post rammer, hit some posts in the ground, put a few boxes up. And people always look at my numbering systems, and we'll come to that a bit later. And my team now criticise me endlessly, which is fine. It's totally justified. I'm very, very dishevelled in my organisation of that. But yeah, that's how my poor car used to suffer. I'd like to say it's better, but it's not that much. And when a barn has been priored, this is what it looks like. As you can see, all there are boxes along there. Now this site now actually sadly is a little bit useless because they've had to cover it because of rules by the Environment Agency. They've had to minimise the amount of water that hits the ground and run off their cattle yard. So they roofed it. As soon as they roofed it, that colony disappeared. It could be such subtle things. We've still got boxes around the back of the trees, so there's still a few tree sparrows, but this frontage here was fantastic for tree sparrows, one subtle change. And if you think across the whole of the country, any subtle change, any populations, if you go to Flamborough, Spurn, where you see them, it could be a very subtle change, they could lose them. And now that's the thing with tree sparrows, they're very tolerant, but also very intolerant. And the problem is we don't know what they're intolerant of. So the breeding cycle of tree sparrows, this is a scene that you would typically see in around about October, November time, where birds start to hang around in pairs. They are in the flocks, but they will come back to a nest box and they'll start visiting a nest box, and they might make the rudiments of a nest. And they just get together, and so the male, you can't tell the sexes apart, but the male was going in at the box and he was trying to woo the lady in. And I sat and watched them spellbound. This is only about 3 years ago. They still fill me with magic. And he was just saying, come on. And this box had been up 10 years and never used. So I was absolutely delighted with watching this particular sort of thing. And he's luring her in. And incidentally, now I use a thermal camera to survey birds at night. And when I go around the nest boxes, I can look in and you'll see a white dot in my nest boxes. So I can tell the ones that have got wintering, roosting tree sparrows. So when they get together, this is the fairly typical thing. They perch like that. And it's going to squeeze in the hole. And they make the rudiments of a nest. So I do the BTO nest record scheme. So we would record this as a N4, a nest complete but not lined. And because they're weaver birds, they weave all this stuff in, very, very intricate. Looks lovely. So this is a pair, this is a top of the box. This pair is going to go in over the roof, like over the top. Other ones, there'll be a tunnel all different ways inside. You never know which way the tunnel's going to go. And then they line it most beautifully with all loads of feathers, whatever feathers are around. And their favourites tend to be pheasant, red-legged partridge, barn owl, quite popular, kestrel, wood pigeon, stock dove, all of these sorts of things. But my favourite nest is one where the lady who owns the place has got guinea fowl, because we have these beautiful, beautiful, pretty nests with those. But one of the questions I get asked a lot is about emptying nest boxes out. And we do that with blue tits and great tits. They won't use it again. With tree sparrows, I never empty it out. So this is a box, a front opening box. You can actually see here the sort of generations of what's happened with this box. And what will happen is over the winter, about now-ish, the birds will take all of last year's lining out and they'll reline it. But I will only empty a box out if it hasn't been used, if it's being used regularly, and then next year it doesn't get used. So if I'm checking this in April, and by middle of May, if that's not used, I will take it down to about here, somewhere about there. I'll leave something in, because a box that has something in is far more attractive than an empty box. And if you put a new box up, it'll take 2 or 3 years for that, in general, for that box to be used, unless the birds are desperate and they will move in. So this is a fairly standard tree sparrow nest that we would look at. Interestingly, early season, it's a little bit of a leap of faith putting your hand in. Because if you can't see in, you don't know if someone else is there who you don't want to be there. Bees are a particular problem. And I do get stung most years early season by a bee. Quite often I find myself just touching it and coming out quickly. But if you're lucky, you see these, which every time, literally every single time I see eggs in a box, I'm absolutely delighted. And the last egg that's laid is always the palest one. It's almost like they run out of melanin to be able to make the eggs that bit darker. So I will always know when when that clutch is complete. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7's a really, really good clutch. 4 to 6 is about the norm. And then you get them hatching out, and we'll try and count them all. But the one thing you must never do with a tree sparrow is pick the female off the nest. With lots of species, you can pick the female off the nest, record the ring, and put her back on. She'll be fine. Things like marsh tit, 100% safe. Barn owls, very safe if they've got young. Different species behave differently. Tree sparrows, old studies done in the 1960s show around about a 45% desertion rate. So I don't pick them up. But if it's a deep nest box and I put my hand in sort of blind and I feel the adult, I'll take my hand out and they won't desert. And I personally think that part of a tree sparrow's patterning is about hiding inside the nest. That's my own feeling about that. And so if you touch them and come out, they feel they've succeeded. And so they don't desert at that stage. So even when I look into a box like this is a very quick snap phone photograph, just like that. And I'll just put the lid down quietly, walk away. And I also get to experience moments of magic, really. happens most years that I will turn up and see eggs in the process of hatching. And I can get a bit soppy about that because I still think it's brilliant 25 years on. So, yeah, I love showing that because I hope that just gets that sort of moment of satisfaction of the work, but also the kind of pleasure of seeing these things coming into the world. So we count every egg that's laid for the BTO records. I've got a big spreadsheet that I maintain every year. We count every young that is hatched, and then we ring every youngster, and then we record every nest success where possible. And we've been doing that since 1999. And this is when I think tree sparrows look at their finest. This is the exact perfect age for when they're to be ringed. These birds are around about 7 to 9 days old, and it really is very, very tight when the right time to ring them. If you ring them when they're too young, the leg is really big and puffy, and the ring doesn't fit. If you ring them when they're about to fledge, they could fledge on you before they're ready. So I run this spreadsheet, and I've got predicted dates for the next checks, and it is absolutely incessant, the workload, as to make sure that the day, 2 days late is too much. And 1 day too early could be too early. So it's very precise how we do this. And I always forget to say this. So generally speaking, the first egg is laid around about the 19th, 20th of April. And the last youngster ringed is about the 15th, 16th of August. So during that 16-week period, it's around about 35 hours a week of checking, counting, recording. So what I do is I often in the evenings in the summer, I don't actually go home from work. I just go straight out and I'll get in just after dark. And that'll be 5 to 6 days a week like that. It's very, very intense because of the sheer number of visits you have to do to get the precision. So I can take endless pictures of young tree sparrows looking pretty cool and looking quite punky. So, but this is a brood absolutely perfect for ringing. They have been ringed. And this is a size when they're getting on a little bit too big size. So this is only 2 days older. And at this stage, you can see I'm holding that in a very tight cupped hand. This is a bird that if that jumped out the nest, it's not going to survive, but I might not be able to get it back in the nest. So it's really, really precise. And every year I get asked questions by people on social media who try and do tree sparrow projects about handling, and I have to be so precise with them so clear about what you have to do. So after the first couple of years, I became a bird ringer, not really to do with tree sparrows, but I just realized that it's fine that we're ringing these youngsters, but we're not monitoring what they're doing, where they're going. So I got my trainer at the time interested and involved, and we started trying to misnet tree sparrows, and everyone told me it wouldn't work. They're too clever, and they are. And they're very, very hard to catch. But they're not too bad the first time. Second time, really, really struggling. So we tried various different methods, and this is where I first got really involved in game covers and conservation crops, things like this. This is a crop that's put there for shooting. I realized there was tree sparrows and reed buntings in it, so I just put my mist nets down there, and we caught a couple. And we kind of realized that's a good method for catching them. And we went out another place and we caught some there. And I started to watch their behaviors, and I've become quite adept at catching them. And when we first off started to catch them, this is the original map I drew, because I just thought, well, this shows you how crude it was at the time. In that I ringed the place and I caught 10 tree sparrows from that site. I also caught 12 from 2 kilometers away, but 1 came from a lot further, 2 6 kilometers, and 4 here. Now, this was a very old map, so it's very interesting because this map's slightly different these days to then. The reason is that I only had a few sites in those days. So nowadays, there's a lot more pins on a map because there's more sites. But straight away, if you look at that map, you'd go, well, actually, in that red hashed area, I've got nothing there. Well, that's because I didn't have any sites. And so I realized that was obviously a place I had to put the next set of nest boxes, because there could well be tree sparrows there. They were certainly within the range. And so the project evolved over the years by, I would find a farmer. All I did was look on a map and then just look to see buildings. And I just drove to the farm, didn't plan, didn't know how to contact them, names. And I just drove up to a farm and I would say, excuse me, I'd like to put some nest boxes up for tree sparrows. And of course, they've not really heard of tree sparrows. And the farmer would agree and go, okay, yeah, what's it about? And you go, hey, a really, really rare bird, really brilliant. He said, well, okay, yeah, when do you want to put them up? Now. Don't ever give them a chance to back down. And I remember several times I'd be walking off around the farm and the farmer almost trying to catch me up. I was like some sort of con merchant, because he was sort of walking around trying to catch up with me and I've already got the box up. And then I started getting a couple of contacts from people saying, you went up to so-and-so farm, you didn't come to my farm. You ought to put some boxes on my farm. So I'd go and put some boxes on their farm. I remember on one farm, I just drove up a lane, didn't know where I was going, and suddenly this 4x4 came screeching up behind me. And I thought, I'm in trouble now, because I am not here with permission. And this chap said, what are you doing? I said, well, just looking to see if this site is suitable for tree sparrows. He said, you're the tree sparrow man. Why have you not been to our farm before? So that's kind of how it evolved. And in fact, in the very, very first couple of sites, I was only allowed to put tree sparrow boxes up if I gave them a barn owl box for free. So after the first several years, we had all these local movements, 2 or 3, 4 kilometres, starting to feel a bit that they are just local. They're not going anywhere. And all of a sudden, at Broadhinton Sewage Works, we found an adult right at the start of the season. Unfortunately, it was dead. It was dead, like half stuck in the hole. But it had a ring on. It wasn't one of my rings. And it had been ringed up near Redcar. So a crazy, crazy movement. But what we now know is that tree sparrows move up and down the east coast. So the birds up in the East Ridings and Spurn and Flamborough, most of those, or a lot of those, are migrants. And they'll go down to Suffolk and Norfolk and maybe even Kent. So this bird would have been one of those that just came across a bit too far, didn't go down. So it didn't survive. But we had another one that did. So we had a bird go 185 kilometres to Mildenhall in Suffolk. And it actually joined the tree sparrow colony. And the chap that was monitoring the boxes there is actually now a friend of mine, funnily enough. And that bird stayed for 2 years. It had 2 breeding seasons. And I think there's still a handful of tree sparrows in that place in Suffolk. So that was a sort of nice story for us. But my feeling about those long movements is that they're actually a bit of a disaster, because why would a tree sparrow go that far if there was suitable habitat in between? So it should have found somewhere beforehand. That's how I feel. So thankfully, it had to go as far as Suffolk to find somewhere that was decent. So this is a tree sparrow here with colour rings on. I experimented with colour ringing. A lot of bird ringers will experiment with colour ringing. Some projects persist, the ones that are successful, and others don't. I did a few years with it. This individual, actually, this individual bird is my oldest ever tree sparrow, 8 years old. So a real survivor, passing on good genes. But we tried all these colours, but we had 2 issues really. One was with volunteers reading colourings. We had some bad logic arguments with people where you say you must use telescope to look at colourings. And they went along and said, can't read the colourings. I said, use a telescope. No. They're using binoculars and you won't see them. And the other thing is that a colour will dominate over another. So red's fine. But if you do purple and red, the red dominates, it looks like red. But I've had people report sunset orange and all this sort of stuff. Cerise, it's where one colour's dominating over the other. So colour ringing for tree sparrows isn't very successful. And this is the other reason why. Because when they go to the nest box, they hold their feet very, very tight under their body. And so they make colouring reading almost impossible. We did find a few interesting little movements in those days, but we actually found that just misnetting them and getting the retraps was far better. So everything that you've heard so far is kind of good research, good effort, good volunteer conservationist kind of stuff. Really, really good. And unfortunately, though, this is the downside, and this is the side that everyone else has seen. 3 sites here, and they were all coded, and my sites are still coded, because at this stage, tree sparrow nests were being robbed by egg collectors. And one particular site, not one of these, one particular site had them stolen 3 years in a row from the same row of nest boxes. And we had good intelligence to tell us that it was a certain individual who was coming down and taking corn buntings, maybe hobbies, and they were basically like you do a day's birding or weekend's birding. These folks were coming down and going around and taking a sort of set of eggs of different things. It stopped one year, and I read in the newspaper and I realised why. It was when a certain very famous egger fell out of a tree and died, and that solved the problem. These 3 sites were unbelievable. Site J, first record, 16 tree sparrows we've got. So I put some nest boxes up, and we had them used straight away. Our top was 28 pairs in nest boxes. But site D, we put some boxes there, had a few pairs. Site L, only a couple of pairs, not very many. But across these sites and across the wider area, we knew there was a lot of tree sparrows. And one day, I caught the most tree sparrows I've ever caught. And I used one net, and there was a fire with a load of ash, and tree sparrows love to ash bathe. And there was a whole load of barbed wire in there. I saw the tree sparrows going in and out. It was amazing. Put one net up and I caught 110 tree sparrows. We estimate there was somewhere between 600 to 800 tree sparrows. That was 2005. They were extinct there by about 2019. They were completely extinct, but nearly all gone within a couple of years. Most alarming decline. This is that site. So we started to get house sparrows moving in, and we were blaming house sparrows for pushing the tree sparrows out. We realised when we looked at the catches of what we were catching, that house sparrows were just taking advantage of the gap. It was the tree sparrows had already gone or going, and once the tree sparrow flock was down to such a small size, the house sparrows came in. And when tree sparrow colonies seem to crash, they don't seem to be resilient at that stage. They just go, and they seem to fail then. And this decline, when I looked into it a few years after, I was so sad. And we only lost them finally in 2019. So I know they could come back because we did have birds from the Downs go up to that area. But what caused that alarming crash? Now, the funny thing is, I used to work in Reading, and there was one particular day, and it's just one day that caused that. If anyone remembers July 2007, it took me 8 hours to get back from the centre of Reading to Swindon. We had that an amazing day of rain, an incredible day. I've never known anything like it. And what it did, it turned the whole of the Thames Valley into that. And I only found out because I asked what was then my 15-year-old trainee, because I was saying, what caused that decline 2-3 years ago? And he said, well, that was that day it rained. And it was. And the whole of the Thames Valley in mid-July, so that's second brood tree sparrows, all flooded and stayed underwater for about 6 to 8 weeks. And what that did, that wiped out the whole year class of tree sparrows. And my studies now show that 90% of the breeding adult tree sparrows each spring are birds hatched last spring. So what chance did they have in the face of that extreme weather event? And that's why they went from that area. So I know if we reintroduced them into that area in good numbers, they would survive. But with all the flooding we get these days, would that be kind to put them back there? I don't really think so now. But we were getting these brilliant, brilliant maps from the Downs. And to try and explain, we've got this is the Marlborough Downs up here and the Pusey Downs down here. I don't know how to do it on both here. No. Right, I'll point to the people in the room. So this is the Pusey Downs and this is the Marlborough Downs. There's a road in between, it's the A4 between Marlborough and Avebury. So you're on the chalk high and then you come down to the road and there's very, very discrete areas. Landowners all work together in the two different areas. And our birds were showing that it's one whole landscape. It's not just the Marlborough Downs or the Pusey Downs. So on this day here, we were ringing at the red site. And all of the other markers are all the places where the birds that we caught at the red site had all come from. And they were all in our nest boxes. So it's one from here, one from there, two from there, 7 from there. And this shows a prime example of how all of the landscape is just all connected. And that no one farmer has got the hold on all these tree sparrows. So it really is a landscape scale project. And the area we cover is about 200 square kilometres, roughly speaking. So for me, this was the powerful sort of thing that I was dealing with all these different farmers, each one a different relationship. And people ask me about how I deal with each individual farmer. And I haven't really got a one-size-fits-all way of dealing with farmers. There's some that are really awkward. There's some that are brilliant. There's some that are okay. What I think I have to do, and I have done, is when I start working with the farmer, I very, very quickly work out where I stand in the pecking order. If I'm just tolerated, just go along, don't commit too much, but just do something. Others, they actually let me stay in their house, even when they're away, if it means that I can do something overnight or do something in the morning. I've got others that are just feeding so much, and it's just every different level. So I think that's what helped me, because I was working with about 40 odd different farmers. This was a particularly interesting map. So when we do a ringing session at a site, they really excite me. At the end of the day, when I catch all these birds with the rings on, I can't wait to get home to see where they've all come from and then quickly do the map like this. For me, it's like one of the most exciting things, because that is the product of all of my last summer's work. And we found out with this one particular site, or two sites, how two places were inextricably linked. Really, really fascinating. So the site in red, marked 1, that was the site that I was ringing at. And then all the other sites, those other birds came to that site. But the red line to the one that's marked 2 is particularly interesting, because this is 2 sites where the birds breed at the site where the 2 is, but they don't winter there. They turn up late. Every year they turn up very high. They turn up very, very late. So always the last broods I ring. But the site 1 is also high, but for some reason the birds like it there. So a lot of the birds, my track record of these 2 sites is that the birds from the one marked 2, they nearly all go and winter at the site marked 1 in the red. I've now also just found out that actually the ones at 2 also come down the hill the other side. And so they're kind of wintering in 2 different places. So they're doing a really, really short altitudinal migration. Really, really short, just coming off the hill, down there, then back up. But if you consider, if one of those farmers made a drastic change, the other farmer would also lose their tree sparrows. And if you think back through history, I mean, some of the older members here might remember tree sparrows in Berkshire and other counties. You might think about, well, this site, nothing changed. But they might have changed at the site they bred at, or the other site they wintered at. So not every site was in isolation. When we ask about what's wrong with tree sparrows or what's happened to them, it's the landscape. It was all of it, all together. So for me, that was like the real worry. But it answered why we lost them inside Swindon, because we used to get them on my sewage works where I'm based. We lost them in 1994. but farm buildings were demolished 2 kilometres away. And that's what caused our tree sparrows to get lost. So if anyone's thinking about trying to reintroduce tree sparrows in the future, it has to be landscape scale. It can't be one site, never can be, because of maps like this that provide the evidence. So by 2010, which when I do this presentation, I now think, oh, blimey, that's a long time ago now. But by 2010, I'd thought, well, I've done 10 years of this. That's a lot of work. I've saved tree sparrows from extinction in Wiltshire. I think that'll do. And a friend of mine said to me, what's your exit strategy? I said, oh, I don't know really, make them safe, but they're not safe. So I guess I've just got to keep going at the moment. And I was considering at this stage about actually doing just Site J, but they went extinct eventually. So I'm glad I didn't pick just to do that one. And I said to him, well, I'll just keep going for the moment. And I had no idea what I was going to do, if I'm really honest. So by 2010, we got to this situation where a very quick increase as we put lots of boxes up. We got to a stage by here that we've got about 900 nest boxes up. We're feeding around about 5 tons of grain a year, working with several different farmers. And if you look at the red, the number of pairs, over the last 6-7 years, a bit stable, looks okay. And that is despite losing all those ones in 2007. So the Downs has absorbed the losses of the Thames Valley. Breeding productivity changes an awful lot. Look at 2007. Wet, horrendously wet summer. Really affected them. So 2010, I'm thinking about how do I very gently just pull back from a project or just maintain, don't do any different. We'll see how we go. I was seeing tree sparrows. We had a good team of volunteers. And then we thought we're doing okay. And we were doing okay. And now we'll have a little break. So at a point that I was going to have my exit strategy, it all got blown rather asunder by this thing that happened called the Marlborough Downs Nature Improvement Area, which was the first farmer group, the very first farmer cluster to be created, helped by someone from the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust. So farmers clubbed together, and they had these ideas that they were going to improve the community access to the countryside. They were going to have community events, and they were going to do biodiversity. The farmers, when they had their inaugural meeting, invited a whole load of people that had something to do with nature, access, rights of way, things like this. But in their inaugural meeting that I wasn't at, they were talking about, well, what should we do? Should we make butterflies our flagship, or mammals, or birds? And they said, well, we could do birds. Yeah, we could do birds. And then one of them said, well, I've got this chap, he comes onto my farm, and he's got these nest boxes for tree sparrows and barn owls. And then someone said, no, I've got a chap who does that on my farm. And after they've all chipped in like that, I was the middle of the Venn diagram. So they realized that I was already doing their project for them. They had me there, lined up, done. Now, just out of interest, really, just to sort of say the kind of background, all these people are the driving forces. So up on the top left here, you've got one of the biggest game shoots in North Wiltshire, huge game shoot. Until I did the tree sparrow project, they wouldn't let me on. I was only allowed to put nest boxes at one site, which is their dump. But the dumps are always the best places anyway, so that was fine. But the keeper in the middle wouldn't have ever let me on. After the Marlborough Downs, we're now really good pals. We do lots of work together, changed it completely. But over on the right-hand side, you've got Teresa Dent, who's just retired. She's on the board of Natural England eventually. We've got an MP in the middle there, forgotten his name, but it doesn't matter. We've got a couple of farmers, and then there was Paul Christensen, head of Natural England at the time. So some good sponsors there. There's Paul down there. This chap, Chris Musgrave, was a farm manager. And then this lady is a very special lady. She is heavily involved now with the North Wessex Downs area of outstanding natural beauty, a lady called Gemma Batten, but she's one of these ecologists who specialise in stewardship projects and helping farmers. She's been instrumental in this project. Without Gemma, this would have all just fallen apart. And so all these people worked together, and thankfully, they all wanted to do the biodiversity bit, but I was already delivering for them. So the question was, what could we do about it? And Gemma downloaded my brain. She's brilliant. And I'm very, very cheap. All it cost was a dinner and about maybe a pint. It was very, very easy. And she just sat there and asked me loads of questions. And at this stage, I didn't know what made a tree sparrow site. I didn't know why they were at one place and not at another. And so she asked me quite a lot of good challenging questions to understand why. And one of the links that we realised was that nearly all of the best tree sparrow sites had elder. Now, everyone hates elder, or farmers do, because it breaks up a hedgerow. But actually, all of my best sites had elder. And I said, well, elder must have something to do with it. Has to. Don't know what, but elder's very, very important. That was about the best thing I could think of. So, and they nest in nest boxes. So what we did, we created tree sparrow villages. So we put up boxes, and we just found different ways of putting up nest boxes. We increased cover crops like this. We realized that cover crops were where tree sparrows like to be. So it all upscaled. I was doing quite a good job anyway, but I got a trailer. And then the feeders got bigger. So these feeders now, I don't do meters, these feeders are 5 foot long. Huge, great big feeders. I've got a lot of buckets because we just couldn't get enough grain. So everything just got bigger. We ran out of barns to put boxes on. So we got posts, and we put posts out in the middle of nowhere. So it all grew, and in fact, that's not the last number because we're now at 1164. I just found after that there wasn't much else we could have done. But then I was doing all of this stuff quietly. Those people who follow me on social media and see my constant posts about this, that, and the other wouldn't realise that I did this project for all of those years completely in quiet. No one knew what I was doing, and I was really happy with that. It didn't worry me in the slightest. I'm just saving this bird. So by now, you wouldn't think that now if you see me on social media. But I'd be quite happy now, not posting, to be honest, just doing the job. But suddenly it put me in the limelight. So we had the students from the Royal Agricultural College came and helped us plant a hedgerow. And the keeper that was in that Purdy Awards, he's hiding. He's hiding at the back there. That man, he's planted more trees than most people you'll have ever met. So that was brilliant. And then the keeper now, this lady here is now the head keeper. And one of her main jobs on that farm to this day is filling all the feeders for tree sparrows. And I had to work with school children. So I had to behave myself and be nice and approachable and friendly and make nest boxes and stop children hitting each other on the head with boxes. So we did this, and then we turned this into this was a right old do, where I just showed them an empty nest box with a nest inside. Well, it was one of the most fascinating things those kids have ever seen. And the trust with the farmers grew, and everything upscaled. So we're now feeding, well, that was at this stage about 15 tons a year of seed. So that the farmer was donating me grain, leaving it on the forks, and I would drive the tractor, go in there in the dead of night and fill my trailer with it. And I'm still doing that now. So this the only way I'm going to drive a tractor is in his barn. And I know exactly how to use the forks. But this farmer, even better than that, to be honest, when the trailer lights break, he fixes my trailer lights for me as well. It's an extraordinarily privileged access that I've got with these farmers. But in all honesty, they believe in what I'm doing. So we all work together. And I've had to do farmland bird feeding demonstrations, teaching farmers how to feed the birds and why. And it's not just throwing some grain into a crop. It's actually what is in the mix, what we're feeding these birds. So tree sparrows have got a fairly small bill. They're going to feed fairly small seeds. So we feed them millet. Now, some people swear by red millet. Some people swear by white millet. I swear by millet. And I mix the both together, but whatever they feed on is what they're used to. But millet runs out of bird feeders. So I then mix it with high energy seed on a sort of 1/3 basis, just to bulk it out to stop it spilling out of the feeders. That's what I do. But here with Robert, wonderful, wonderful chap, I was feeding a mixture of barley and rapeseed, because barley's for corn buntings, rapeseed's for linnets. So it all depends on what birds you've got. And tree sparrows like to feed off the ground, so you've used feeders. They don't like to feed on the ground, but linnets and corn buntings do. There's real specialisms as to what we're doing. And I guess this is where the public speaking side of me started, because the farmers were publicising their new nature improvement area. So I had to go on to BBC Farming today with this, the most enthusiastic farmer you're ever going to meet, David White. Absolutely amazing chap. And we did this piece on farming today. I've had to do lots of interviews and things like this. And some of the farmers, because some of them worked in the city as well, one of them said to me only last year, she said, Matt, I've watched you over the last 10 years and you've developed so well at your public speaking. But then suddenly I was given this unique decision-making platform where we had 12 dew ponds as part of the funding. There were 12 dew ponds to put out. And I was able to decide where some of those went, and the farmers were asking if they could have a dew pond. And this is my favourite one. It's my absolute favourite one. And funnily enough, that very first picture with that small feeder and that hedge, this is at the end of that hedge. And it's at the bottom of the field. It was always a wet, boggy corner. And we've put a dew pond in, and it's around about 20 metres by 10 metres. On this day, I took the picture. I've actually got mist nets up, because you can see a pole just there and one there, and there's a couple of birds in the net. So probably swallows or house martins, I expect. But water's really good because it has lots of inverts around it. And in fact, when the RSPB first came out with me in about 2002, because they had that amazing project at Rutland Water, and I said, well, come and teach me about the downs. And the first thing the chap did was say, where's your water? I said, it's the downs. You don't have water up here. Well, Rutland, all their work they'd done was shown that tree sparrows are completely reliant upon common blue damselflies. But no, they're not, but they were there. And then the RSPB did some great work where they looked at the diet of tree sparrows around the country, and our tree sparrows, their closest diet to the ones in Wiltshire was in Aberdeenshire, where they've got chalk arable. So they're just using whatever their food source is. They'll have a niche in those particular areas. But having a dew pond, having water is a definite advantage to tree sparrows. So where we can put dew ponds in, we will. And I was the conservation officer of the Wiltshire Ornithological Society. I still am, been doing that since 1996. And I realised that our stands and things were a bit rubbish. So I upgraded our stands to make us look a bit more professional, things like this. And the Marlborough Downs farmers don't do anything by halves. So I kind of matched them quite well. So when you see Open Farm Sunday and a farm opens up and the people from the local village have a little wander around the farm, the Marlborough Downs farmers did it. And they had to stop after this one because it got too big. Because they had, I think it was 2,500 people with all of the events and all of the things. And they always put me in pole position. So normally I was at the entrance to really put tree sparrows and farmland birds into your face. On this one, I was in the best place. I was right by the Ramsbury Brewery. Every year, the Marlborough Downs farmers meet up and have an end of year review. what they kind of worked out is that their review, if you ask them, was that they're farming. That's what they do. And I was asked to give a summary of my summer. So I talked about some barn owls I've ringed and talk about maybe a brood of little owls or some yellow wagtails or a few things like this. And when I was trying to think about how I quantified how I reported on the tree sparrows to them, I just did it like this. And this is not an up-to-date one. But most of the farms, I don't refer, half of them, I don't know the farm name, even now. It's the people. So they go by the name, and then I just wrote it down. How do I capture it? Well, obviously, you at David, you got 49 pairs, 438 young flesh mules, and their average was 8.9 per pair. And then I did this going right the way down. What I didn't realise was how competitive farmers are. I'd like to say I was clever, but I was clever without realising it. And I suddenly created this beast of tree sparrow envy. And it persists to this very day. No one's ever beaten David, and if they ever do, be crazy. Now, so interestingly was this chap, James. Very, very funny, because didn't have tree sparrows for years. Didn't have tree sparrows for years. Had a few boxes, never used. And about 3 years in, would come down after the meal, Matt, how do I get tree sparrows? And I said, well, you've got to feed, James. So the first year, he put some feeders out, bought loads, put some feeders out, weren't used. And I went and had a look at them, and it was cattle food. And next year, he came up to me and went, how do I get tree sparrows? I'm feeding. I said, but it's cattle food, James. Cattle food is no good. You need to feed high energy, millet, things like this. Okay, all right, okay. And then some other farmer came in and went, put your hand in your pocket and stop being so tight. The next year, he had 2 pairs of tree sparrow and they raised 31 young. Yeah, so they went bonkers. Now, he's got a lovely flock of tree sparrows, 9 to 12 pairs, and he's got feeders everywhere. His keepers are filling them, keeping them fed. He's doing a superb job. He's now one of my favourite people. That's on a farm in 2002. Let me put the boxes up, but wouldn't let me come and inspect them. So, and I now count him as a really, really good friend, actually. But it's just interesting that this created this competition with the farmers. But the average, I think, is very interesting. So over all the years, the average fledged per pair is 7.9. Tree sparrows, generally speaking, have 3 broods. So I can tell you that the sort of figures of something like, all the ones that start first broods, of those, about 80% go to have a second brood, then a further 60% go and have a third brood, something along those lines. So if you have 3 broods in a year, you could easily produce something like 15 to 18 young. But a lot of the first broods fail at the start and never get going again. So this average of 7.9 per pair across the year is just an average of the whole number of, like, you start with 49 pairs. If you end up with 20 pairs third brood, so be it. It's just the average of all of them. And it's a very consistent way that I do it. And so I then looked at it and thought, well, actually, with some of these people, they're doing very well. But if you're like James in that particular year, and he has improved his habitats now, really, James at that stage would have been an ecological trap. You're encouraging the birds there, and they're not getting a success rate high enough to keep going. So then we worked on his habitats, and we planted hedgerows, and we've improved his hedgerows and things like this. So with all of these things, looking at the averages, the chap Joe, 2.4, that's sending a species into oblivion. You have to then work on the habitats. So that was what we then looked at. That made me, the average made me start to work about the habitats and look at them and look at the elders and look at the planting regimes and those things. So suddenly it was more than just putting up boxes and a bit of feeding. It's all the additional habitat stuff. And this is the biggest site that we have. Like I say about competition and farmers, this farmer shall not be beaten. I think he has 45 feeders, but he's cut the feeders down, cut a hole in the dustbin, and then that then sticks up into the dustbin. And you've got wire around to stop rooks. But the more you look up the hedge line, the more you can see going right the way up the end there. There's so many. But incidentally, this hedge line looks nothing like this now. It's now 3 trees wide on both sides of the track. There's a track just behind. And that was because all these trees were dying, looking very sorry for themselves. And we had a complete rethink, and he listened to my advice, and we did a massive planting scheme all the way up there. And we left the original plants in and then planted either side of them. So it's now a double hedgerow, 3 wide. And they used to cut the inside of it. They now don't, and it's full of bramble. And I can't tell you how many tree sparrows are there. There may be 200 now. It's peaked at 450 in previous years. So it's a super place for tree sparrows. Not much else, but fantastic for tree sparrows. This year, lady's doing an MSc, or she's just done her MSc, and she's now teaching me stuff about tree sparrows that I didn't know. So I look at that site and think, this is a bit average. She said, no, no, no. All the changes of the habitat heights mean there's different insects in each one. And we've been doing DNA testing of the poo, and there's more results to come from that. But she looked at this site, very different to me, and went, this place is brilliant. And I said, you're right, but I don't know why. But she's now educating me and teaching me why. In 2014, I was convinced by the BTO, British Trust for Ornithology, to try a tree sparrow RAS. That's a retrap adults for survival. So it's one of these things whereby we monitor any bird in the breeding season. You've got to catch a certain number of the adults each year and then retrap a certain number the following year, only between April and August. And the idea being that they can then monitor the adult survival by the ringed versus unringed and all that stuff. So they said, Matt, you should do it on tree sparrows. And I said, well, I don't want to disturb them too much. I misnet them as little as possible, but try to be very effective when I do. And the summer, it'd be quite difficult. And they said, well, there's only one project that's ever been hardly successful. The data's rubbish. We need to do it. So can you try? So yeah, okay, I thought I'd try it. I phoned up the bloke who had the only project on tree sparrows, and his biggest catch ever was 12 tree sparrows. And so I said, okay, I'll have a go. We'll have a go. My first catch, we caught 56. So what I would do, I do each site just once, and I do a mixture. I'll put a net by a feeding station, and then this is in front of that very, very big row of boxes. But you put that up by day, you won't catch a single tree sparrow. They'll see it coming. So what I had to do, I had to sneak in at about 2:30 in the morning, like a commando, really, really quiet. Bearing in mind, you mustn't take them off the nest. So I'm thinking, what distance will they not be disturbed? And the BTO said 2 or 3 meters will be fine. It takes away the association with the box. And I snuck into this place in the dead of night, put the net up there under absolute silence, come away, and then the sparrows then wake up in the morning. And the best way I could describe it is like if I sneaked in and put a mist net across your bedroom door, and you were, and that's what happened. And it's really, really successful. And so we do catch a reasonable proportion of tree sparrows, but it has to take that different approach. If you go in there at dawn, it's too late. The birds see you come in, they'll come out the nest box. So every time I do a RAS session, I know that it's getting up at horrible o'clock in the morning. So I'm leaving the house at around about 2:30 to be able to snick those nets up before the birds are even thinking about waking up. So yeah, it's really, really hard stuff, I have to be honest, to be able to get up quite so early. But I do each site once during the summer so that my effort is consistent. And we've maintained that. And the BTO have now said that the tree sparrow data for RAS now, it used to be called uncertain. It's now, I think, moderate, because there's only 3 projects in the entire country. So, and my data is the best because it's so consistent, and we do catch around about 100 adults each summer. So it's really, really hard project, really very, very taxing, to be quite honest. But it produces those maps. So those maps are worth it. So when you do follow me on social media, or those that do, and I put that map up, just know that probably the time you were coming home after your night out was when I was just going out. So the other way that I would catch tree sparrows for the RAS project is catching them at feeding stations. And there's 2 feeders just behind the hedge here. And then just on the left here, there's a great big bramble patch. And that is their safety zone. And I catch them coming in. So I think pretty much every bird in that net is a tree sparrow. And this is last year. So there's still plenty out there. So when you look at what tree sparrows need, somewhere to nest, they need the food, and then actually dense hedgerows or even just one patch of bramble is all they need. When you go to a supermarket and they've got a sort of patch of cotoneaster and you see a load of house sparrows, well, all tree sparrows needs a patch of bramble, just one big patch of bramble or blackthorn, and they've got that safety area. And I actually call them chatter sites because that's where they go and digest the seed and sit and be safe, and they have a good old chatter. So I do like a chatter site. And it does produce these maps that I love to see. So this is that site where I just had the mist nets up there. And it just tells us how these birds have moved around the environment. And interestingly, the site furthest over on the left there, that's a site where it's had 2 pairs, 3 pairs of tree sparrow every year. The owner's not been that involved. But funnily enough, the lady who lives on the farm, whose husband's a farm manager, she's now one of my ringing trainees. And suddenly the farm's a bit more enthusiastic. We put some more boxes up, they're buying some seed, and they've now got 3 and 4 pairs of tree sparrow every year. Only a small touch, but just enough to get her, to show her the map and say, there's your yellow pin, your bird's gone down to David's, quite powerful. And they're friends, so it even works out that way. This is one of our sites. This is a summer catch in mid-July, and we ring the site that is in white, and it just shows that on that particular day we caught not many sparrows, to be honest, but it just shows that the distance they've come is around about 6 kilometers or so, the furthest one. But on the same day, if you can look at the detail of that, there's a few birds there. Those are nearly all juvenile tree sparrows. And juvenile tree sparrows, post-breeding, go around in these crazy hordes, huge hordes sweeping through. They're absolutely incredible. And the noise they make. And they just fill my nets. And because I'm trying to catch the adults, I thought these were useless. Because I want the adults from last year. I don't want juveniles that are a few weeks old. And I was thinking, well, this is not very good data at all. Seeing crazy bunches of these beautiful little things. But suddenly they can produce their own maps. And I realized that juvenile tree sparrows disperse from their natal sites a lot earlier than we ever realized. This is in mid-July. So birds that have fledged in mid-May and June and early July are already moving up to 13 kilometers. So we used to start feeding tree sparrows in November. Way too late. If you've got tree sparrows nearby and you want to encourage them to your place or try and catch those birds that are naturally dispersing, you've got to be feeding in June because they're going to find other tree sparrows and go there. So as soon as I got any new sites, I have to put the feeders out in June because the map told me so. So all right, most of them were from that one same site, but they've pulled in birds from a huge area. So for me, anyone doing tree sparrow projects, and I get contacted from all over Europe about this, I tell them, put feeders out in June and July. Straight away, get those youngsters surviving and get them in flocks where they clearly feel safe. So I think the best way to attract a tree sparrow to a site is have tree sparrows at the site. And then you do get these occasional ones, which sadly are a complete failure, in my view. But Hampshire birders were terrifically excited a couple of years ago to have a bird down at Hook with Warsash. They loved it. As a tree sparrow turned up, it's got a ring on. So suddenly I got interested. And between the photographers who were posting on social media, I contacted them, and we were able, through the photographs that they took, we were able to read both sides of the ring, and we worked out which individual it was. And it actually came from the site where you've just seen the map. And it was ringed nesting 18th of July, and it's then turned up there for the winter. But in all honesty, that bird's a failure. It's gone to a place where there's no tree sparrows, and it's useless. And we actually had another one about 15 years ago go down to the very tip of Paling Island, and they're lost birds, sadly. If there was tree sparrows there, it'd be brilliant. But at least we tracked that this interesting movement, although it's not got any conservation value. So this photograph was a complaint, because the landowner sent me this picture. She took through a window. She said, "Why isn't there a tree sparrow in every port? Why have I got a chapinch on one?" But yeah, pretty dramatic. So we do have lots of tree sparrows. And in fact, one farmer in 2018, I wish he'd never said this, he said, "At what point do tree sparrows become a pest species?" And I said, "Well, we need a few more than we've got at the moment before we have to start thinking like that." But they can be a pest species, because this is a purpose designed little owl box. And the tree sparrows go into the hole of the little owl box, fill the whole darn thing with the nest material, and then right at the very back of the box there, they make that tiny cup of feathery nest. So not only do they go in and block the little owl box, but they stop me ringing the young. Oh, no, they don't. I took the lid off. I'm not going to let them get away with that. So yeah, so I've now put the screws in, and then I take the lid off, and I ring the young, and then put the lid back on. But they have completely and utterly ruined my little owl nest box project. So I've actually, where I've got tree sparrows, I've actually taken little owl boxes down, because the tree sparrows just blocked them up. So after having such good numbers of tree sparrows, and I'll show you the numbers in a minute, and clearly been a successful project, there are ups and downs. I'm always asked about research, always asked about what can we test, what can we have a look at. And primarily, it'll always be a conservation project, but we have to find out what's affecting tree sparrows. So we tried this thing called a pit tag. You see on that bird's left leg, it's got this grey ring, and this is a pit tag. So it's pretty much, it's got like a tiny little grain of rice sized sort of tag in it, and then it's red like reading a barcode. But you have to then run it over, just like when you're shopping, you've got to run it close enough to the transmitter. So the transmitter in this case is this black loop, and then the unit, the logger, is down at the bottom. What we found was, if you put the loop on the outside like that, the bird doesn't like it. Really, really doesn't like it. So we realized we had to sneak it inside the box. And we got some really good data. And the fundamental thing that I wanted to find out was, when you've got a box used, 3 broods throughout the summer, 30 days apart, that must be the same birds, must be. And then when you get that box used 3 times, must be the same. But if you've got a box over in that corner used first brood, and a box there second brood, and a box there third brood, is that the same pair? And I wanted to work this out. So we bought a few of these transmitters, we used it. The data was amazing, but we had a couple of broods desert. And I stopped doing it, because I said, this is conservation, it's not sort of getting these birds going down. But I've now come round to a different school of thought now. If we get the funding, I would like to do it again, but I'd like to actually have the loop transmitter and the wire integral to the box, so that it's always there all the time. And then all we've got to do is plug in the thing beneath out the way, the actual data logger. So that is something I'm considering doing for the future. I think there's some important questions to be answered. But it did already give us some interesting things. So this bird was this individual was caught on the 8th of January 2017 in a winter flock, big winter flock, nested in box 996, 2 kilometres north. First brood successful, second brood failed. Don't know why, whether the males died, don't know. Doing the tree sparrow raz catch on the 22nd of July at that place with all the cows and all that, retrapped her, and she's got a fresh brood patch. So she's had her first brood successfully, failed second, and has then flown 14 kilometres south to team up with someone else and have a third brood. I think that's amazing. I'd never have thought that a sedentary sparrow would do that. So when I get these random pairs suddenly arriving in the third brood, they could be from anywhere. And sometimes you know that one male has managed to attract second female because you have 2 boxes nearby, one of them never used, and suddenly productivity drops. And he's been very ambitious, but he's not providing for 2 females. A very, very interesting bird, probably worth a couple of nest failures in a sense to understand that's what happens. But the other thing it did, it gave us something I think is even more powerful. A question I've been asked many, many times is that if you put all these nest boxes up, these birds get used to nest boxes, tree sparrows become hooked on nest boxes. They don't know what a real nest looks like. And I said, I don't think birds think like that. They just take advantage of a situation that's suitable. One of the farms in their very, very beautiful garden, they've got a little pergola. There's a tree sparrow nest inside the pergola. Well, if I see a tree sparrow nest, I've got to stick my hand in and see what's going on. And I thought I might be able to get that transmitter in that year. And we did. And we poked it in. And so a pair nesting perfectly naturally, with a female was ringed as a nestling in a nest box the previous year. And now she's nesting in a natural nest that year. So that answers the question for anyone that ever says, oh, well, nest boxes means they won't nest naturally. No, it really doesn't. And we've got enough natural nests because every single youngster in the nest is ringed in the nest boxes. And every year we're catching plenty of new birds. And the ratio hasn't really changed over the years. In fact, I would say the more nest boxes you put up, the more natural pairs there are, sort of go along with it. So very, very powerful for me in answering a potential criticism. So the tree sparrow abundance since roughly the time that I started our project, if you look at the 90s, this is the national trends from the BTO. Look at the 90s, obviously it hit this shocking low. And then there was this increase. And this increase wasn't just me. It was other similar projects to do with nest boxes and feeding. There's a huge project up in Lancashire, where similar size to ours, maybe just slightly smaller. Over in the east, East Ridings and Yorkshire, Scotland, people doing roughly similar projects has definitely had this beneficial effect. Up until about 2018, and you notice the last several years there's a drop-off. Why? I don't know. But this is our results for all of the time that we've done the project. So the red is the number of pairs, blue is the number of young fledged. So if you can imagine, up until 2018, I thought I was magic. They were just going and going and going. It was brilliant. And that was the point when that chap said, when are they going to become a pest species? And he really, really put the mockers on it. Because 2018, pretty much, they were just going down and down and down. And the problem is with tree sparrows, they never go level. They either go up by 25% or down by 25%. So if you get 2 25% years, you think you're doing brilliant. If ups and ups, and then they go down and down. And I have to be honest, everyone that knew me by 2021, 22, I was being a right miserable swine because I felt that all of my year's work was going to get blown away, and I thought they're going to go extinct, even under my watch. I was really, really worried Then we had a little good year. Then we had a big down year. And then last year, 145 pairs again. Now, you wonder where it's going to go next. I don't know. But we started with very low number, about 30 pairs originally. So we're definitely up. We've increased the range. And even despite everything, we've still managed to maintain them. But at the moment, I kind of feel that I'm a bit disappointed, if I'm really honest. But everyone has assured me that if I hadn't done my project, they would certainly be extinct. So I think now in the last 2 years, I've dealt with that. And I kind of go, yeah, okay, at least we've managed to maintain them. And I now have been very clear. I was talking to my mum this afternoon that I've actually got no exit strategy at all. My exit strategy is that if tree sparrows go extinct tomorrow, I've done everything I can do to save them. If they persist when I leave this mortal coil, that's good. And if they go extinct one day after I've left this mortal coil, that's not my fault. So I'm just going to keep going. It's a lifetime commitment. That is it. I've got no choice. I have to just keep going. So that is the way it goes. Now, interestingly, I did a talk for the Wiltshire Ornithological Society a couple of years ago, and they did their own charts for me. And they showed up in North Oxfordshire how their summer and winter surveys, orange and yellow, have gone right down. And then they showed the national trend of going upwards. And they identified the two things that they hadn't done in Banbury ever. They'd never fed and they'd never put nest boxes up. So even if tree sparrows have had a trend down the last 5 or 6 years, it's clear that doing nest boxes and feeding is definitely an advantage. I often find that the farmers know the answers better than I do. And we work together. I ask them questions, but I ask them in a way. And one of the farmers just the other week said to me, he said to them, do you know why these tree sparrows have declined the last 5 years? And I said, well, no, I've got no idea. If I did, I'd have solved it, you know. He said, what about bird flu? I said, I have no idea. He said, well, doesn't that fit exactly with bird flu? And the problem is with a tree sparrow, it's 20 grams and it's that big. It's not a Canada goose or a gannet. And if they die, a rat will pick them up overnight. So I don't know. Maybe it's bird flu, and maybe they will suddenly have a resurgence. What I have noticed, that number I told you, 7.9 young per pair per year, average, over the last 10 years, that's 8.6. Last year, 9.3, the year before, 10. They're breeding like wildfire. What we've got to do is work out how to keep them surviving. And it's the winter bit is the problem, and that's what we've got to do. I've just tabulated some of the tree sparrow movements, and this is a way to kind of tell people about how they're moving, and if you do any projects for them, what you'd have to do. And it's pretty clear if you look at the kind of ratios that nearly all the tree sparrows move 2 to 4 kilometres. That's the distance. So if you did have a farm where you've got tree sparrows, then put nest boxes up and feeders up to 4 kilometres away. That seems really, really obvious. That's what you're going to have to do. You might get away with it up to 8 kilometres. But beyond that, you're kind of largely wasting your time. But also, if you were to do like a reintroduction project, you've got to look at the whole landscape over quite a radius there to see how to do it. You wouldn't do it on one farm. And at least this sort of information, I'm going to improve this yet, but this tells me that's what you've got to do. So I've been trying to lobby Natural England, and it's been very difficult. Tree sparrow is not a priority species for them. It beggars belief to me, to be honest, how we keep reintroducing white-tailed eagles and ospreys and other things that are very, very good for, tourism. That's it, yeah, our tourism. Yeah, and waders. These things all get massive attention, and yet tree sparrow is not a priority. And someone at Natural England said to me, well, they're doing really well in the east of England. There's loads in Suffolk and Norfolk, there's loads in Yorkshire. They're the same ones. The ones in wintering in Suffolk and Norfolk are the ones going up to Yorkshire. It's a double count. But ours are sedentary, as our data kind of shows, and those are migratory. It's two different populations. Now, so what I did, I contacted nearly every county recorder in southern Britain, south of Birmingham. And there's 250 pairs of tree sparrow approximately in southern Britain, southern England, of which 150 pairs are in Wiltshire. So if that's not a conservation priority, what is? So and they're also now listed in Europe as being not very safe. So there's something we need to do something with. We've had some very good meetings with Natural England. If you're going to reintroduce a bird, there's a whole set of criteria you have to meet. Even if we convince them that tree sparrows are important, you've got to make sure you know the cause of the decline. Well, we don't know. We know when we lose them. It's between breeding. It's between when you're bred and when you're next breeding. Now we call that wintering, but is it autumn or is it in the winter? We don't know. We really, really don't know. Now, that's where we need some help to understand where the issue is. We definitely know they seem to do better where there's elder trees. I think post-breeding, they probably feed on all the insects that are on the elderberries. That's why I think they're useful. But we need the research. So we work with Natural England and the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust, and we're going to do some buccal swabs. We're going to take swabs inside the mouth or inside the bill and then test them for parasites, things like this. There's going to be, at some stage, going to be some blood sampling, but we've at last got Natural England involved thinking about, we've actually got to try and work out what makes tree sparrows ill and what makes them die. Because if we can increase longevity, they're going to keep breeding, they'll do brilliantly. So I'm going to keep going while all that other stuff kind of happens. But on top of that, I'm quite a practical bloke. And so we've got a grant from the Landscape Trust of the AONB. It's FIPL, Farming and Protected Landscapes. So this weekend, with a load of volunteers, I'm planting 200 meters of hedgerow with 200 plants, 2,000 plants. We've just got another 100 nest boxes, and we've got 20 feeders. Now, the reason I've got 20 feeders, we've got enough feeders, but the farmers don't keep them clean. So I'm using our feeders, and we're going to interchange the farmers' ones. They don't know this, by the way. So there's no farmers there. They don't know this. I'm going to go and take their feeders down one by one and clean them. And so we're constantly going to be cleaning and swapping so that we get those feeders clean to make sure there's no disease from that perspective. When you replace a nest box, the issue is you put the concrete one up. They like these concrete ones, but you have to wait a few years for it to be used. And then they persist on using the old one that's falling apart behind. And so I don't dare take 784 down because they keep using it. And 784B is now 784B because I don't take the other one down. And that's how the project has these ridiculous numbers that it sometimes has. And this was nothing to do with tree sparrows. This was a trip I did bird rigging in Mongolia, and there were tree sparrows everywhere, and I can't believe it. Those tree sparrows were so common. I was thinking, where are you nesting? What are you feeding on? And I just couldn't believe it. But they're actually a lot bigger than our tree sparrows. They're the size of house sparrows. So they're very, very big things. They can out-dominate house sparrows out there. They're feeding on seeds in the cow dung, which was interesting, was one thing I saw. The other thing I saw was by the little homesteads, they're nesting in the roofs, and there's all these great big seedy plants. And I watched them on these. I thought, you're feeding on this high seedy stuff. I've missed something. And I had. I also noticed that tree sparrows did brilliantly where there was fat hen, white goosefoot, dungweed, whatever you want to call it. And this is why, remember I said earlier, the dumps are brilliant. They're full of fat hen. And the farmers are telling me they've got fat hen everywhere. They haven't. They've got mugwort. It's got the red stem, not the green stem. And mugwort is absolutely brilliant. And I've got some sites on the Salisbury Plain heaving in corn buntings where there's masses of mugwort. It's a bare ground colonist. It's easy to grow, absolutely simple. What I don't know is it as good as fat hen? So I don't know, but this is something where we're now encouraging the farmers to allow these little weedy corners. And I think when you look at stubbles, and someone asked me about regenerative farming, I think that weedy corners of stuff like this, turning over dung piles and rubbish dumps, allowing dungweed to grow or mugwort potentially, that could be the savior of tree sparrows. They like to feed off the ground, and that's just replicating a feeder. It's seed hanging off the ground. So I think this could be one of the big sort of things we need to know. The Marlborough Downs farmers recently had a meeting where it's almost like renewing your wedding vows, where they've said, look, we've been going along, it's all very well, we're not an NIA, we're a space for nature, let's do something different. And so I chair one of the meetings in which we're at there, and the farmers themselves, I didn't lead this, they've already pledged to go 100% insecticide free. That's a good one. I did this. Now, if I'd done this 10 years ago, I'd have been told to clear off. But I've made them all pledge to plant bramble. It's the best pollinator. Lots of birds nest in it. Linnets, yellowhammers, tree sparrows love to roost in it. And they've agreed. They've seen the common sense of bramble. Fantastic. And then we are looking into planting mugwort. It's quite easy to do. And then one of my farmers, his suggestion, not mine, he's going to find some fat hen. He's going to harvest the seeds, and he's then going to try and grow it as a crop to then harvest more seeds and see if we can distribute it out. He's the same one who fixed my trailer. He's the same one who gives me about 10 tons of seed a year. But it just goes to show the will is there, the desire is there. And basically, if you work with these farmers and inspire them, infuse them, and keep working with them, keep encouraging them, and don't criticize them, then I still think there's a chance for tree sparrows.
Brilliant. Not only, I mean, I've learned so much about tree sparrows and the project, and your passionate is a bit of an understatement, I think, personally. But also, it's such a wonderful project from the point of view engagement and involvement, and the competition, of course, always useful. Oh, absolutely wonderful. Right. Well, we've overrun already, but who cares? We've got time for a couple of questions. I'm sure. Yeah, I thought Neil might be first. Neil.
One just a little observation. You're mentioning back in our earlier conversation goes back 50 years, because one of the great places to see by late summer sparrow was absolutely interesting in pattern.
Yep.
The other thing was the recent fall off. I wonder, we had, oh hang on, I got a mic. Hello. The recent fall off in numbers, I think that is linked to, we had 3 in the last 5 years, really quite hot, dry summers, 2019, 2020, and 2022. Is the problem actually, when it gets too dry, the food goes in the crucial period after they've fledged? Just put it out there.
It could be. Certainly, like the young fledged, very, very good. But 2 of those last 3 years, the population has overwintered well. So I tied it in with really wet winters. Oh. And then we had one really wet winter, and then they did really well. I really don't know. I really, really don't. And the problem is, with nest netting wise, I don't want to cause them too much disturbance. I don't want to harass them. But like, so Natural England said, well, have you sampled them in September, October, November, December? I said, well, no, I kind of just ring them once or twice a year just to surprise them. But maybe we actually do need to take samples for parasites and stuff like this throughout the autumn. It could be, because we do know that tree sparrows are more prone to salmonella than house sparrow. So it could be that. I don't know. But the big question for me is why they're doing so well in the Far East, but in the last few years, they've had a massive resurgence in Norway and Finland. Why? In urban parks and stuff. I was in Helsinki and there's tree sparrows everywhere. And so it's just a mystery.
Thanks.
Any more questions? There's another couple in if we've got them. Stunned silence. Anybody on Zoom?
Yeah. Did you encounter any specific pressures of predatory nature and any specific negative reactions by tree sparrows on the presence of predators, like, for example, cats?
Oh yeah, they're 100% cat intolerant. No, they really, really are. So if you've got cats on the farm, the tree sparrows will leave. We've lost 2 sites to where there's cats on the farms. So one of my farms has had a farm cat 3 years and lost their tree sparrows. So they're 100% cat intolerant. Sparrowhawks, not so much. They'll harass them for a bit, but don't cause devastation. A local pair of kestrels can have a local issue. The tree sparrows tend to be okay. Larger raptors, no problem at all. I've actually got tree sparrows nesting in a buzzard's nest. It's a bit of a climb. It's about 30 foot up, but I still go up there to ring them.
Do you worry about parasite loading when not removing old nests from boxes?
If their take up of boxes that are totally cleaned out is unbelievably low, a lot lower than if we leave them uncleaned. And my view is that in a natural nest situation, no one's cleaning them out. In an old elm tree or ash tree in a hole, no one would have done it. So I leave it natural. But I say, if the box is unused for 2 years, then I will clean it out.
I also said thank you for a brilliant talk.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Did I see a question from over here?
Just going to say, we do need a potential in Berkshire as well, because we have chalk dam, you know.
Oh yeah, I mean, so I'm quite an optimist, and when I look at a lot of the work that's been done recently with stewardships and habitats, things like this, I think there's a lot of sites that are very suitable for tree sparrows now, but the problem is they won't move the distances. And that's why I think they're an absolutely perfect species for reintroduction, because we know the habitats they need. And I even know how I would do it. You know, I'm really clear the best way to do it. And it would be, I mean, I would do a breed and release, and I release them in flocks of 40 and 50s in places. But I put them into a large cage with feeders, with all the habitat, and then open the cage in the spring so that they know it's their house and their home. That's what they do. So I've been approached by several estates. People offer to buy them, you know, and there's a lot of landowners who are so passionate about it that I really think that if they were reintroduced into certain places, you really could do it. But it would have to be on that scale to make sure that you've got those 3 kilometre link ups. But it would, I feel very confident that it would work. And I think that because ours is the last big population in southern England, I think, and the sedentary population, we ought to be working with, you know, Zoological Society London or something like that, Cotswold Wildlife Park, to captive breed them and then release them en masse, but in good places. It screams it to me.
Right, I'm afraid I'm going to pull the plug there because it's getting on rather late. Thank you so much, Matt. That was absolutely brilliant.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I'm hoping we can have a progress report in however many years you think it is, when you've got some more information.
Yeah.
Right. Quick reminder, 2 weeks' time, photographic competition. You've got until Friday midnight to put your 3 photos in. Please do. We've got space for a few more, so please get them in quickly, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Thank you. That was fascinating. Absolutely fascinating.
Good.